So again, since these events happened, we've had a lot of directives come down from front office to us in our emails about, if you need help or know someone who needs help, here are resources available. I've passed those along to our coalition members, but I would say specifically, I don't know of any events right now planned specifically kind of as a result or in response to post-Afghanistan things happening, issues. Great question, though. I know for our coalitions, it's been on our mind. Ray in the back, we've talked about that as well, something that we could do from the Twin Cities Coalition to honor and make sure veterans know that we care about them, we care about their service, and it matters.
I was going to speak to, we've been speaking with a lot of veterans too, and I feel like they've kind of taken it upon themselves, like, I need to check on my buddy, like I have this listserv. We've been hearing the stories about how, the Vietnam veterans are just like, we need to check in with these guys, we need to let them know that their service mattered. So we hear a lot of great things happening amongst the community, and I feel like that's kind of where our coalitions can come in and just kind of encourage that too, like, hey, who do you know that we need to reach out? How can we offer that support to each other right now?
You bet. Other questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. A lot of great information in there. In addition to that, will this presentation be available to us, or where can we get the information?
Yeah, great question. Rachel, do you all have an answer for that? Have you disseminated it? Otherwise, we're happy to, if the slides are available.
Yeah, they're going to be sent out the day after Thursday for the conference.
Okay, and for those virtually, so the question was, will the slides be available? And Annette says there'll be an after action email and we'll be sending out the slides with that. You bet. Otherwise, you could always contact us via our email too if you wanted this information or other information that wasn't covered here, and we can see if we can get the answers for you. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Ray.
Overcome what they're feeling. And the gentleman asked the question earlier, which is really interesting, with the recent pullout from Afghanistan, which intensified the feelings of what did I do? Did my service matter? What's going on with the community? And oftentimes we feel like we're taking the back seat as veterans, as military. What's happening in our community? I think a time to celebrate our veterans and honor them and let them know that their service mattered and continues to matter is due, and we'll work with you to do that. So my point I'm trying to make here is, what are we going to do to address the mental health and the invisible things that we can't see? Thanks, Ann.
Thanks for sharing that. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir. I'll just give you the mic right off the bat if that's okay. Then our virtual folks can hear that.
Hi, is there any difference between service members and veterans in rural areas versus urban in terms of issues, or are rates higher or lower in one setting, and just anything on that sort of topic?
Thanks for the question. That's great. Yeah, so I would say that I don't have numbers here, but we do know that individuals in rural areas, because of course they're not as resource heavy or resource dense as, say, the metropolitan area or in a more urban setting, do struggle at, I would say, greater rates. I can't offhand recall. We do actually have another program that kind of partners with us called TWV, Together with Veterans. And so that is specifically aimed at taking suicide prevention into the rural communities, and it's usually led by a veteran themselves. Has anybody heard of that program, Together with Veterans? No? Okay, so we could include that too, maybe in our slide deck when we get that out, but that's a really great program too, and I know they're always looking for active veterans to take part in that as well. Thank you for the question. Other questions? Anything virtually? Okay, thanks. All right. And again, please reach out to us via email if you have anything additional that you're not comfortable sharing here. We welcome that. And then I'll welcome up our speaker, Mike.
Morning. One of the rewards of riding ships when you're a youngster is that you get to wear these hearing augmentation devices when you get older, and in this environment I have to be careful that I don't fling them halfway across the room when I take my mask off. But so good morning. I want to thank Andrea and Annette for inviting me here this morning, and I want to thank all the Yellow Ribbon companies for going above and beyond and all the things that you do every day to support service members, veterans, and our dependents. My name is Mike Erickson. I am on the board of directors for the organization called SAVE, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. I hadn't heard of Andrea's SAVE process yet, but I was thrilled to see that it aligns nearly perfectly with the mission of SAVE. You'll hear some data that I've gotten from SAVE that's not quite consistent with theirs, but along the same lines. I'm also a veteran. I retired from the Navy after 30 years of combined active and reserve service. I'm also a suicide survivor. So suicide survivor is kind of an odd label to attach to those of us who are trying to make sense of a tragic event. I can assure you that none of us feel like survivors. We all feel like victims in our own right. So Andrea and Teresa did a great job of giving you some data and strategies around suicide prevention. My goal here today is to share my experience and hopefully give you some data and strategies around suicide postvention or grief support. I think it's important to understand that postvention are activities that you reduce risk and promote healing after a suicide, but it's important that we plan the postvention before a suicide occurs. So my son Luke was only 19 years old when he took his life in 2007. Luke was a little eccentric. He would do things like augment his concert orchestra tuxedo uniform by wearing a cape and a fedora. He was a smart kid, graduated from high school with honors and with very little effort. I was told he was the first sophomore allowed to take senior honors physics in his high school, and even though he had to work at that a little bit, he did pass it with a B. He was a creative musician, but he was a bass player in a headbanging band, and I sometimes had to struggle to find the music in there. He had just finished his first year at St. Cloud State University. He had higher expectations from college than his freshman year provided, and so he was looking forward to transferring to a school in Florida that specialized in the music business. He was a lot of things, but one of the things that he wasn't, or at least we didn't think he was depressed or suicidal. We never saw any indication in that in the years, months leading up to his death. We just thought he was a typical moody teenager. So the year that Luke died, 36,000 Americans, over 36,000 Americans died by suicide. Barely a decade later, or a little over a decade later, in 2018, that number was 48,000. So an increase of over 30%. Here's where our data is going to differ. Some of the data that I've got more relevant to this group is that in the 2 decades since 9/11, at over 30,000, that's not wrong, it's over 30,000, but almost twice as much, 4 times as much. 30,000 service members and veterans have died by suicide. You may be familiar with those statistics, but one thing that you may not have heard is that typically for every person that completes suicide, there are between 7 and 30 people left behind, family, close family and friends that are left to deal with it. Andrea said there was like 135, which really doesn't surprise me in the veterans community. I mean, we all know that the military is much more closely knit than the general public, and so it wouldn't surprise me that that effect is more broadly spread out. So the end of May 2007, I was getting ready to deploy to Italy for a NATO exercise. My daughter Leah was already there for a study abroad, and we had planned for my wife Jody and Luke to fly over after the exercise so we could have a family vacation. One of the things I had to do before I left was to put our family pet to 15 years down. His bladder had failed, he lost control of his bladder, and he was only able to drag himself around by his 2 front feet. And so it was time. Luke asked me if he could go to the vet's appointment with me, and I said sure. So we went in. Max died very peacefully, and when we got home, Luke grabbed Max's leash off the dashboard and went in the house. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought he wanted a memento of his dog. A few days later, Luke took me to the airport. He was a little upset with me because I made him get up at the ungodly hour of 10 o'clock in the morning. But yet, when we got to the airport, we hugged. I can still remember his stubbled cheek. I told him I would see him in 3 weeks, and I said, "I love you, big guy." As I walked to the airport, he yelled after me, "I love you too, Pops." That was the last time I would see him alive. I'd only been in Italy for a couple of days when I got a message to call home. It was a little earlier than usually in a deployment to get a call from home, but I didn't think much of it. When my wife answered the phone, she handed it to my best friend, who told me that Luke had taken his life. I asked him to put Jody back on the phone, and after asking several times, she finally told me what had happened. Luke had hung himself with Max's leash. I've never experienced it before, but I discovered that our brain has a little bit of a self-defense mechanism. It throws us into a fog when we're presented with things that we're not able to cope with. It allows us to function, but that's about it. And so with the Navy's help, I was able to reconnect with my daughter in Rome, and we flew home together the next day. So I think we have a few life-changing events as we mature, our first job, marriage, becoming parents. But I think we only have maybe 1 or 2 life-defining moments. Luke's suicide was a defining moment for me. Here I was, having to cut a path with no idea of where to go. I had no mental model of what to do after his suicide. So a couple of months after Luke died, some friends had SAVE, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, send us a suicide survivors support group package. Included, where did I put it? Included was this pamphlet. It's been updated a few times, but it lays out exactly what survivors go through in the first months and years after the event. And I think without this pamphlet, I don't think I would have survived to be here today. And I'll never remember the words in the letter that came with it. It says, "You may not realize it, but the worst has already happened, and you will survive." In the first 2 years after Luke died, I saw 2 counselors. One was a thanatologist, a person that specializes in grief. One was a social worker who I saw through our employee assistance program at work. I also participated in a grief support group every week. And after a few years, I transitioned to be a group facilitator. Some friends had asked me, well, it's been a couple of years, aren't you over this by now? And rather than tell them no, I became a facilitator. So I could tell them, well, yeah, but I'm a facilitator now, so I have to go every week and do that job. So every Monday night, you can find me with a group of other survivors as we help each other navigate our own individual path. Now, the progression through the grief, the first 3 years for me were the first year was the year of firsts, second year was the year of the lasts, and the third year was the year of never again. When you get through the first year, the first birthday, the first holiday season, the first Father's Day, you're still in a fog, and so you get through them relatively easily relative to the second year. The fog starts to lift in that second year, and the suicide becomes real. And so you start thinking about the last baseball game, the last fishing trip, the last hug. And it's much more painful than those remembrances in the first year. And the second year is actually much worse than the first. And then in the third year, while the pain is still there, it becomes more of a kind of a wistfulness about the never agains. Never again will we go on a fishing trip. Never again will we do, you name it. So every grief journey is unique. I've learned in the past 14 years, including the 10 years I've been facilitating a grief support group, that there are some common things that all survivors experience. And I want to share some of those with you, the ones that I think are most important to be aware of as employers and community supporters. One is the inability to focus. When Luke died, I was responsible for a portfolio of logistics-related programs, and I was the leader of the Global Sustainment Organization at Lockheed Martin's Undersea Systems Division, and I was able to keep track of it all. After he died, I couldn't focus on a single program for more than a few minutes. Probably took me a year to be able to even approach the level of focus I had before he died. And there are some, but very few of us, that throw ourselves into our work kind of as an avoidance mechanism. But for the majority, we find it hard to focus for more than about 15 minutes. So give us some time to be able to focus again. Guilt is probably the biggest thing, and it affects our ability to focus. We all play what if, or only if, thinking as if I had read them one more book when they were a child or played one more game of catch, we could have prevented the suicide. For me, there are three huge guilt factors, sources of guilt that I still deal with. One is the idea that they're in a better place. I know that's comfort to some people, that they were in so much pain that drove them to this, and now they don't feel that pain anymore. But for me, how could he have been in that much pain and I didn't see it? I was his dad. I was supposed to protect him. Another one is that I wasn't there. In my Navy career, I traveled quite a bit, and I wasn't there when he needed me. And I've been told as much by folks, but people who understood the relationship that we had have told me that if I had been there, Luke probably wouldn't have died that night. And then, of course, there's the leash. So give us some time and some grace to work through the guilt, even though it may be unearned. Shame is another major issue. When my wife and I first went to the grief support group, we sat in the parking lot for a half an hour after the meeting was supposed to start, because we were too ashamed to walk in and publicly admit what our son had done and that we needed help. Even though we were walking into a group of people who were going through exactly the same thing that we were going through. And it's not just the shame around mental health or suicide. We impose shame on ourselves where none really exists. I went back to work after about 3 weeks, and I was walking to the cafeteria, and somebody that I knew rounded the corner at the other end of the hall. He looked up and he saw me, and he turned around and walked the other way. Now, I internalized that, and I was ashamed of the fact that I made him so uncomfortable that he couldn't, that he had to avoid me. Of course, I later understood that that was more about his ignorance or his discomfort on not knowing how to deal with me, and not about me at all. And then there are the hurtful, ignorant, and arrogant comments that impose a level of grief. People they're telling you that he was weak for what he did, saying that he took the easy way out, asking you how could he be so selfish, and worst of all, people telling you that Luke is not going to go to heaven because suicide is the unforgivable sin. And yes, people really told me that. So be gentle with us for a little while. Often our friends and colleagues are afraid to talk about our loved ones because they're afraid of hurting us. It really couldn't be, or it really is exactly the opposite. I don't think it's possible for us to hurt any more than we already do, and we're more fearful that our loved ones will be forgotten. We listen to our colleagues talk about their sons and daughters going back to school or making the football and volleyball team, talk about their wives' new job or the thrilling vacations they're planning. And all that's great, and we love to be a part of the conversation. But when we start to talk about our loved ones, people start to drift away. They have to go to a meeting, or they see somebody on the other side of the room that they have to talk to. And we just long to talk about our loved one, to talk about something that he had done that was thrilling or exciting. So don't be afraid to engage with us, even if, and maybe especially if, you have to deal with overcome some discomfort of your own. So I said I wanted to give you some strategies around grief support and post-suicide. I think the strategies can be summarized in a simple phrase: have the courage to be present. Probably the most important thing I've learned in the last 14 years is the power of presence. So let me close with a poem that I wrote about 8 months into my journey. It's kind of interesting that before Luke died, I didn't have any time for poetry at all, but it became very therapeutic in my grief journey. But fair warning, as far as poems go, let me warn you, I'm not going to be named the poet laureate anytime soon. It's called The Facade. Every morning, like a pair of overalls, we pull a facade up around us. It is the facade of I'm okay. For us, it's a safe response to your question, how are you? For you, it's the lie that allows you to remain blissfully ignorant. After all, you say, it's been, pick your period of time, you should be over it by now. Isn't it ironic? Your response immediately after the suicide was, I can't imagine what you're going through. Yet as time passes, you imagine there's some magic milestone, and after which everything gets better. You so desperately want the old us back, the friend, the colleague you knew before it happened. It doesn't get better, it gets different. It doesn't get better, it becomes a part of who we are. Every evening, nearly exhausted, we let the facade down. Once again, bare to our new reality, our loved ones have died, and we don't know why. So please have the courage to be present with who we've become. Thank you. There are any questions or from the heal it up. Oh,
Thank you for sharing your story so much. Very powerful. Two questions I have for you, and you kind of touched on this, but I just recently had a colleague, not really a close friend, just kind of a professional colleague whose son took his own life. And I did reach out through LinkedIn, but do you have any other advice that we can do when that happens? And then the second part of that question is, how can we in the workplace, if someone experiences that, when they come back to the workplace to resume their work, the survivor families, how can we help them feel more comfortable in the workplace, and what are some things we can do?
yeah, thank you. Really, the most important thing you can do is just let them know you're available. You don't need to feel like you have to say something, like you need to comfort them. You just need to be there. We were blessed that our son was a pretty active member of our youth group at church, and so after he died, all the kids gathered at our house, probably for a couple of weeks. And while you might think that would be painful, it really wasn't. It was very, I don't know if cathartic is the word, but we were able to talk with them. We learned things about Luke that we didn't know before, although none of them felt that he was suicidal or depressed either. His death was a mystery to them. So just make them know that you're available and express your sympathy. Understand that it is the most tragic thing a parent will go through. They say when your parents die, you've lost your past. When your spouse dies, you've lost your present. And when your kid dies, you've lost your future. And that very much is true. You have so many hopes and dreams for them, and then they're all gone. And then the second part of the question, when they come back to the workforce, don't be afraid to talk about it. As I said before, you're really not going to hurt them any more than they're already hurt. I mean, it's just virtually impossible. Don't be stupid about it. Don't say things like, well, you've got other kids, you'll be okay. Or in the case of a spouse, well, you'll get married again. Just take your cues from them. And we really are pretty transparent. We're pretty vulnerable at the time. Heather, anything online or? Again, thank you for listening to me. I know it's uncomfortable sometimes to hear those kinds of stories, but your participation in the recovery is critically important, and I appreciate your willingness to do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mike, for sharing. I was wondering if there were times when you were going through tough spots at work. Were there times when you were asking for help and nobody picked up on it?
Yes, I really need to give Lockheed Martin a shout out. I mean, they have a great, when we were down in Egan, they've since closed that operation and moved it to different places. But I worked in Egan. They had a great employee assistance program. We had a social worker that came in every Thursday, probably for a year. I spent a half an hour in her office every Thursday. My boss was great. It was a little bit of a surprise. He was kind of a autocratic, whip cracker kind of guy. But when I came back, he came into my office, he shut the door, and he said, Mike, you just need to let me know when you're ready. And take whatever time you need, but you need to let me know. And so at work, I really didn't have any problems. And I had all those other resources. I can't stress enough how important it is to find somebody to share that journey with. Because I've learned that if you don't deal with the grief, it's going to deal with you. And that can turn out to be not very pretty. Anybody else?
Thanks, Mike, for sharing your story. I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit more to the idea of postvention and talking about suicide before it occurs in a community.
Yeah, so I mean, all the strategies that you guys provided are great. They're one of the other things that suicide survivors, most of us do, is become prolific readers. We can't read enough about mental health, about suicide prevention. There are some things that I've picked up over the years, and we talked about one of these on the phone. There's a gentleman by the name of Thomas Joyner. He's a PhD suicidologist out of Florida, and he has a theory that there are three things that need to be present for someone to take their life. One is a thwarted sense of belonging, that they don't feel they belong anywhere in their world. One is a sense of burdensomeness, that they're a burden to the people around them. And then the last one started out as access to lethal means, but it became acquired, something he calls acquired capability. And what acquired capability is that over time you have thoughts or you take actions that make the lethal act not easy, but possible. I mean, survival is probably the strongest human instinct we've got. And one of the things that we all struggle with is, how could somebody want to take their own life? Well, it's through this acquired capability. So in the community, keep an eye out for those things. Our son, like I said, he was in a heavy metal band, and they have dark lyrics, and he talked about, or his lyrics, you had to read them because you couldn't understand them when he sang them, but when you're, after the fact, when we read them, they're pretty dark, and he talked about hanging, and he talked about people being killed, not so much about him doing any of it, but in retrospect, we probably should have caught something there. Certainly the thwarted sense of belonging. And you all know the LGBTQ community has a higher rate of attempts. A lot of that, I'm sure, is around the fact that they don't feel they belong. So be aware of those three things. If you see somebody that doesn't feel like they belong, that's something that Luke was great at. If somebody was sitting out in the corner by themselves, he'd go over and bring them into the group. If you hear somebody talking about being a burden, engage with them and try to figure out why they feel that way and what you can do to turn that around. And then the last one, again, that acquired capability is it takes kind of a continued awareness as you see it progress. And I think anywhere in the chain that you can break that, or any one of the other two elements, get rid of them, you stand a much better chance of preventing suicide. And in the grief support, I mean, I had a picture of my daughter. So when Lockheed Martin shut down, I had to transfer to San Diego for a couple of years. And in the middle of the night, you get pretty depressed. And I had a picture of my daughter on the wall outside of my bedroom. And there were a couple of times early in the morning, I was in a pretty bad spot, and I'd open the door, and there she was. And it got me through it. So. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you again, Mike. We didn't have any questions on the virtual platform, but many, many comments about how hard, just sincere and helpful your story was. So thank you. Thank you for coming today. Now we're going to take a break. For those of you on virtual, we will just take a break till 10:45. And then we're going to hear, for the rest of this morning, we're going to hear some mental health trends within the Minnesota National Guard. From Tammy Udi is going to come up and tell us about that. So we encourage networking for those of you here in person, getting something to eat, have a good bathroom break, and we'll meet back here at 10:45. Thank you. to have the resources that we're going to be talking about today. We have a lot of handouts, and we will be sending all of these electronically to all participants, as well as the PowerPoint afterwards. So those of you who are on virtually, you will be receiving all the handouts, but there's several handouts in your folder with the resources. And one of the resources today is something that the Yellow Ribbon companies have been asking for. Some data, some information in regards to just kind of what's happening with the Minnesota National Guard and just what kind of has been going on. All of you have asked me for this, I think, because of the Minnesota National Guard being on the news all the time, both domestically and overseas. So we know that they're employees within your organizations. So we really want to bring someone from our partner organization, our Resiliency and Suicide Prevention Program, and our psychological health counselors that we have for the state. So I'm very happy to introduce Tammy Udi, who's going to be with us today, and give us a little kind of inside look at what's going on within the Minnesota National Guard. Thank you, Tammy.
Okay.
Oh, we have two now, so if you have a question afterwards, we'll come from the back and
Okay.
bring the microphone.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm not like a stand at the podium kind of person, so I may just move around a little bit. So, like Annette said, I am Miss Tamara Udi, Director of Psychological Health for the Minnesota Army National Guard. I'm also a part of the National Guard. I'm a behavioral health officer. And so on the part-time side, I go to drill just like many of your soldiers that you have within your organizations. So I'm very familiar with that. Okay, now I have to learn how to do this too. Okay, so today we're going to talk about facts, trends. It's been a long 18 months for the Guard, as you all know. We've had so many different missions, so many different things pulling at us in terms of what's going on, whether it's civil unrest, COVID missions, regular deployments, our regular drills and trainings that we need to accomplish. Can I get a show of hands? How many here have soldiers or airmen with the Minnesota Guard within their organization? Okay. And then I'm also going to just add to what we've heard in the past two presentations in terms of suicide prevention, what we teach on the Guard side, and mental health as well. I should say too, if you have any questions, please feel free to just ask in the moment. And if anything comes up online, Annette, let me know. Because then while I'm talking about it and while it's fresh on our mind, it's easier for me to answer questions that way. So we know that nationally suicide rates have increased by 33% in the 10 years described above. There's a lot of speculation as to why that's happened. That may be our increased technology, decreased connectiveness amongst ourselves, and just rise in mental health. Suicide doesn't necessarily mean mental health, right? So we talk a lot about suicide, but I don't want to underestimate depression, anxiety, other symptoms that we may also see in our community. Over 47,000 died in the United States in 2019. That's about one death every 11 minutes. 830 of those were Minnesotans, and one of those Minnesotans was an actively serving Guard member. We hear a lot in the news as well about military suicide rates. And while we know that active duty, meaning those that are constantly serving in an active duty status, are going up, our Minnesota National Guard are going down. In 2019, 17 million Americans thought about suicide, which is what we call suicide ideation. There's many different types of suicide ideation. We have what's called fleeting, which means it comes into your mind and then it's out the next second, which is very common. We have what's called reoccurring, which means it comes into your mind and it's literally sticking around for a little bit, okay? So ideation is like a spectrum as well. But of those 17 million had thoughts about suicide, planned a suicide attempt, or attempted suicide. We know it's the 8th leading cause of death in Minnesota. And soldiers, and I say soldiers and airmen, we have about 11,000 soldiers in the Minnesota Army National Guard and about 2,000 airmen in the Air National Guard. So 13,000 combined in Minnesota. We know that mental health in the military, you face an additional stigma. People are worried about their careers. What if I'm weak? I'm not strong enough to do the mission. What is wrong with me? Will it make others look at me differently? I was privileged enough to go on a deployment returning last December. And so I served as the behavioral health officer during this deployment in Africa. And I can tell you that the stigma decreased during the deployment, mainly because others would see them come and go out of my office, and understanding that it didn't ruin their career. They weren't evac'd from the country. And I think that's really important for soldiers to see that, to decrease that stigma. And I think that when you think about our societal stigma, in the military, it's even more increased. Okay, so soldiers, airmen will be more hesitant to reach out because of their concern of how they'll look, how it'll affect them and their career. Make sense? The good news is more than 90% of people that attempt suicide and survive never go on to die by suicide. Okay? So what that means is that their attempt, that either they were connected to services, they were able to get support for that. I think our previous speaker spoke about not knowing or not seeing the signs, and that's a very common thing, unfortunately. I think the other thing that happens is that many soldiers or airmen join the military for what? What are some reasons that you guys may think? School? Yeah. Get away from their problems at home? What? Nothing, okay. So many join the military, not everyone, but many join the military in hopes of finding a family, right? They hope to find those that they may fit in with. Maybe they didn't feel fit in with other people during high school, and now they're hoping to find that. And I think in the active duty world, that's very possible. However, in the National Guard world, remember that we're doing drills once a month or so, and up until this 18 months ago, unless you deployed, you really were not around other soldiers, other airmen, unless you were in a drilling status. So that means 20-some days there with you guys. We got them a few days, right? And so that hope or that goal of having a family may actually disillusion them, right? And create more of an issue because they were hoping to join, hoping to get their family, and they didn't, okay? So some local facts. We unfortunately, between 2007 and 2017, we had more cumulative suicides in that time than any other state in the nation. It was a huge, huge issue, and not one that we wanted as a marker for Minnesota. We also have one of the largest National Guard populations compared to other states. California, Texas, but Minnesota is right up there in terms of number of service members in the Guard. We shifted in 2016, we shifted our suicide training, awareness training, from these wonderful PowerPoints, which the military is very good at doing, to more interactive, face-to-face talking, and looking at not just suicide, but the life events. What is going on with the person? How are they doing? How are they coping? Who are their supports? Who are the people around them? And with that naturally comes more of a decreased stigma, right? Because we all know that we face challenges in our life. We're not unique. However, when you don't talk about it, when you don't express it to others, it lives within you, right? Instead of within everyone that you're around and you're able to gain some support from. Yeah, and so that's sort of really what we call it as R2. So we actually have like a hand, like it's what we call a flip book. which is just like a notebook like this. And so when we're out in field training missions and we have like an hour downtime, the expectation is that is taken out. Group of soldiers, airmen are, using that, talking with each other. They're not on their phones. They're talking with each other. And they're learning how to communicate both good and bad. We did see in 2019, we did see that number go down, which is wonderful. And it says up here that soldiers see, families of soldiers who have died by suicide see the Guard as a protective factor. And while I think that is mostly the case, I also see soldiers who see the Guard as a risk factor, meaning that it's one of the reasons why they're feeling the way they do feel. Especially if there was an MST, if there's, they do not feel like they're fitting in, they feel like that family isn't there, then it may become more of a risk factor than a protective factor. I think the other thing to talk about too here is the transition between Guard duty and civilian workplace. And civilian, just your responsibilities with your family and your friends. So let's say there's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday drill. And let's say your drill is 2.5 hours beforehand. The week before, week and a half before, out comes a newsletter saying, this is what we're doing. This is our unit training schedule. On there, for example, for me, last weekend, was I had to have 3 uniforms. Before that, I had body armor, lots of different things that I needed to have packed. Well, that's not something you do the night before. So even though I'm working on Thursday, I'm coming home probably every night that week and trying to prepare for that upcoming drill, okay? So it's not like, oh, Friday morning I just jump in the car and drive to drill. There's a lot leading up to that that is very anxiety-provoking for the individual. They may feel anxious. We're gonna do an Army combat fitness test, and I haven't been working out because I've been busy. And now I have to lift 140 pounds deadlift, right? You can see how they would get anxious, right? I have to run 2 miles. I haven't ran 2 miles in 6 months. So you can understand that it's not just about that drill time, it's about everything else that is required of that soldier. Then we throw in the SAD missions, the state active duty missions, where I'm sure you guys have heard about it. You've had employees having to engage in those missions. And so they don't know when they're leaving. They might not know until the night before. They may not know when they're done either. In the meantime, they're 15 miles away from their family home, but they can't see their family. They can't go home, right? And so you can see the stress that putting on that uniform may inherently be. Even though they love serving their country, they love being part of the Minnesota Guard, the inherent stress that they carry because of that transition is very significant and something that as an employer, it's a great thing to be aware of. I don't know how that looks in everyone's employment situation, but just understanding that background of what they're doing to prepare. Any questions on that or thoughts on that? Kind of threw a lot out to you guys. No? Okay. Okay, so the trends we're seeing. So for younger soldiers, 18 to 24, I would say that one of the most stressful situations that I see on the full-time side is relationships, relationship breakups. When I was deployed, it was like my number one referral. My girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other isn't responding to me. I don't know what's happening. Lots of infidelity. That was always the number one. And for someone who's never experienced that before and knows that, hey, I'm gonna just keep on going in life, I might find someone else in the future, that can be very devastating. And so that was always my number one referral. At times it led to ideation where they felt maybe this is my fault, something I did, I shouldn't have deployed, I shouldn't have put that stress on my family. Those kinds of thoughts would come out. Communication issues or feeling a loss of connections. And like I said, just the time away, you know? You cannot connect. And let's say you have children and a spouse. When I was deployed, my husband was alone with 4 kids doing distance learning. That's enough to spark any sort of, discomfort or difficulty, right? And it's hard not to hold resentment to the other person, even though you know what they're doing. They're serving their country. They're, trying to make an impact on others. That doesn't necessarily lessen the resentment on your spouse or your significant other. 4 kids. Luckily, my husband is retired active duty, so he understood. I'm very thankful that way. What? He is a keeper. He is a good guy. Mental health issues don't just stem necessarily from one situation. Lots of folks have past childhood concerns, trauma, things that have come up that they've never really dealt with, right? And we just hope that we pack it down. And in the military, we say, just drive on, sip some water, you're fine. But really, in reality, is if you keep on pushing that down, it comes up. And it comes up with maybe the tiniest thing that's happened. But all of a sudden, it's like carrying a rucksack. And you just like put something little on there, and you fall down, right? So sometimes we think we have this invisible kind of amount of stuff on our back, and we don't recognize it's there until we can no longer face it. Chronic stress and depression. I think mental health, like our previous presenter said, mental health has definitely come forward during this pandemic. People are more focused on it. I think our younger generation of soldiers specifically are definitely more willing to talk about it. It's something that comes up more. They're willing to just discuss their emotions and their feelings. And so in the military, we got the older generation who was just like, drive on, drink some water. And then we got this younger generation that's like, I want to talk about how I felt, right? And so we got this wonderful mixture of lots of different experiences. And I think that both can teach each other something. And I think that's something that we continuously try to engage with and support both viewpoints, perspectives. I think there's also this idea that if someone has tried a medication for, let's just say, depression, or they've gone to a therapist, maybe they didn't connect with a therapist, maybe, and that's not uncommon, they need to keep on trying, right? But that's hard for someone who has depressive symptoms. Why do I want to get out of bed this morning? It's going to be the same result. Or I tried Paxil or Prozac and none of it worked. Why should I keep on trying? And so that leads to a symptom of hopelessness. Nothing is going to work here. No one's going to be able to help me. And that's a hard place to be stuck in, right? But there is hope. And so part of supporting that person who's in that place is encouraging them to continue to try and listening to them and validating how they feel and where they're at. Lack of problem-solving skills. In the military, we don't have to worry about where we're going to eat. If we're deployed, we don't need to worry about where we're going to eat. We don't need to worry about what our schedule looks like. It's already there for us. Sometimes we don't have to worry about our clothes being washed. Sometimes, we don't need to worry about activities. It's all planned out for us, right? But on the civilian world, there's a lot of problem solving that goes on, right? And so that transition may also breed some difficulty with problem solving. I think the other thing, like I said, I deployed with the infantry, the Tune 135, this past year. The fact that they even had me on a deployment tells you something about the stigma in the military. That they invited a licensed clinical social worker to come on board with them, the infantry, says that the stigma is decreasing, that they see us as a resiliency factor, and they see us as someone who can aid and help soldiers rather than just the chaplain, which has been the previous kind of model. So I wanted to point that out as well. So the other trends we see, financial, especially when folks are coming back from deployment, they've made a lot of money and they're just spending it. They got that new car, they got that new place, you know, that kind of a thing. And so it's really important to help soldiers understand how to budget before they get to a crisis of not having a place anymore. So we have a financial counselor that comes down, is available to anyone in the military, and so we use them often. Because one of the stressors is if you don't have any money, you don't have gas to get to work, you can imagine how that's going to impact your mental health. And then in addition to it, employment. So underemployment is a big thing. I found a job for 20 hours, but with my drill schedule, I can't find anything more that'll work, okay? And I know that may sound puzzling. I'm seeing your face right there. But if you're an 18-year-old with a high school diploma and no skills, you can see how underemployment is an issue, okay? Versus a 30-year-old who has a college degree, where underemployment may not be as much of an issue. And then just challenging work environment. Many soldiers may be told that their military duties are getting in the way. I can't tell my workplace that, no, they increased my drill dates. It's not uncommon for our drill dates to get moved around last minute, depending on what the mission is. And so to have to go and see or tell your employer that when you know that they really need you, sucks. It's really hard. And who wants to be the bearer of that bad news? So imagine if you, sir, you had this huge project going on. Deadline is next Wednesday. And your commander calls you and says, I need you to drill Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You'll be back on Monday. What does that do to your work commitments? I mean, it obviously puts others in a bind, right? Others have to increase their work to therefore ensure that the project is done. So understand that they feel bad about that, right? They don't want to do that, but yet they are committed and have to report. Has anyone been in a situation where you've had a soldier have to do that? Where maybe their drill schedule, yeah. Anyone else? Just one? That's really great. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. What did he say? Oh, so I was right on when I said, okay. I think the other thing is that soldiers can numb their emotions, right? So especially if they've been in situations where they've been in a crisis or they've been in combat and you can't emotionally react. You just got to drive on, right? And so numbing emotions is a very common thing that we see. Not knowing how to identify emotions. What do you guys think is the number one emotion we see, especially in males, that is easy to express? Anger. How about females in the military? Anger, right? Because that's an acceptable emotion for females. What's the one thing females don't want to express? Sadness or emotion of any kind, right? Right? And what do you think is an emotion males don't want to express in the military? What? Weakness, right? So our culture breeds this and disciplines us into this. But those are not always healthy, are they? And you can see how that, bleeding into a civilian workplace, may not always be great. And so part of our role is trying to embrace emotions, talk about emotions, however, still get that mission done when it needs to get done. I think towards the end, when you see the social withdrawal or isolation, that's a very scary symptom that we see, especially if they're very tight-knit in their unit and they have a lot of buddies that they go to and all of a sudden they're isolating from them. That's a very concerning symptom. Because in the military, we're a team. We're all together, right? And so if you have one member who's backing off, then you're wondering what's going on. And there might be misperceptions about that. They go, well, he just doesn't want to hang with us this weekend or that kind of a thing. But in reality, he's saying, I don't want to engage. I'm backing off. So in a military setting, it's easier to see during a drill weekend. But once again, we have a soldier and airman for 2 or 3 days versus you guys. So we can see it pretty clearly during those drill weekends when we're concerned about someone versus in the civilian world. If you notice different symptoms, and I think the previous presenter said this, talk to them. Ask them, I noticed this. I noticed that you weren't, you weren't hanging out in the lunchroom. Wondering how you're doing. Wondering if there's something going on or if you have some support outside of work. Checking back in with them, right? So a couple days later, checking back in with them. Hey, how's it going? How are you feeling, right? So establishing that you care, listening, validating how they're feeling, not trying to tell them, oh, well, I don't understand why you feel that way, right? That's the wrong thing that we don't want to do. We want to be an active listener, and we want to make them feel like you heard them at the end of the day. In the military, we always talk about our own personal stories. So if we have a platoon sergeant who noticed a specialist is struggling, them talking about, I struggled when I was around your age because of A, B, and C. Like, we do that frequently because we want them to know that they're not alone. So that's part of our training, is helping them to understand that they're not alone. There's other people who have experienced the same thing. And I think just the non-judgmental part is really important. And the body language is really important. So we heard a little bit about how the VA, their training, and so what we use is the PathWarm. So we look at the different risk factors here and what they're exhibiting to us. Ideation, substance abuse. Are they feeling purpose or mission? Because if you're in the military, your one thing is about mission and purpose, right? If you don't have a mission and purpose, you feel useless. Anxiety. Do you feel trapped? Hopelessness? Withdrawal, anger, recklessness, mood change. So we look at all of those things. That is not an exhaustive list. There's many more. But PathWarm is an easy acronym for laypersons outside of the mental health field to remember and to think through, right? So if you're a mechanic out in the middle of a field somewhere and you're repairing a Humvee, you're going to remember PathWarm versus, oh gosh, what was that training I was supposed to remember? Shoot, I forgot them all, and then panicking. So we want people to have an acronym to hold on to. So we do provide crisis intervention for all Guard members. We see ourselves, so we have 5 full-time staff on the Army side, 2 on the Air Force or Air Guard side. We do see ourselves as connectors. So we can assess, we can treat, we're licensed professionals. However, we obviously can't work with 13,000, right? And so we really see ourselves as the ones who assess and evaluate and then connect to community care. Follow up with them, making sure that they're getting what they're needing. Maybe they don't feel connection with their current therapist. We'll help them find a different one. Okay, but we're gonna always be there in the background to ensure that they're getting what they need. We can meet with soldiers. It doesn't have to be just drill time. And we do go up to Camp Ripley. We go down to southern Minnesota. We go up to the Iron Range. So we're all over during drills and ATs, annual trainings as well. And there's our phone number down there. So that's 24/7, 365. Soldiers call, company commanders call, others call, just saying, I don't know what to do, or I am the person that I don't know what to do. And so one of us 5 always have that phone. Military One Source is another really great resource, okay? And that comes with free counseling sessions as well. So not every soldier, I don't want to get confusing, but not every soldier or airman are eligible for VA. You have to serve, I think it's 90 days now, within a combat deployment, okay, to be considered eligible for VA care for 5 years after your deployment. If you're service-connected, meaning something happened during your time on drill, annual training, deployment, SAD, and it can be connected to the VA, and they believe that it was caused by the military, then they can also receive services through the VA. VA is wonderful. However, if you don't meet that criteria, you don't get their services. So we like to give a whole list of resources, including the VA. So Military One Sources is one of those. I talked about the personal financial counselors. So they're confidential. They can really help with budgeting, credit management. It's a one-on-one kind of meeting, or with your spouse if you'd like. So those are the numbers up there. There's 3 of them. And I think our last thing is the call to action as employers, because I wonder if you're sitting here going, this is all great information, but what do I do? And so really it's about incorporating awareness of suicide, of mental health into your organization, training supervisors, incorporating basic curriculums that will assist people in being familiar with talking about it, right? That's decreasing the stigma. One of the hardest things, I think the first presenter talked about, one of the hardest things is saying to someone, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? And if you haven't said that, can I get a raise of hands who has ever had to ask someone that question? Okay, that's wonderful. But if you haven't had to ask that before, it's a very hard thing. And so training and building curriculum within your workplace, resources for your employees, is what our call to action is. And I think building a culture that encourages reaching out for mental health help, so that it's not that stigma. So employees aren't looking at you and walking in the opposite direction. That people know those skills, right? Some of us are born with those empathy skills and understanding, and some of us are not, right? And so do we just let those that do not know just walk around the rest of their life? Or do we help them and encourage them and teach them, right? And so that's part of this, right? What do you say to someone when they've had something traumatic happen to them? How do you react, right? So that's really, I think, an action-orientated goals to incorporate into your workplace. And then I think use of time off. We've all heard of mental health days, right? We kind of use it in a way of like, I'm using a mental health day. But like, what does that look like within your organization? Someone wakes up and they're feeling really overwhelmed. And they're just feeling like, I need to take time out for myself, kind of ground myself. Maybe I need to go to see if my therapist has an opening today. Maybe I just need to talk to friends, to family. What does that look like in your organization if someone needs that break or that stop? Is that acceptable? Is it not? How about if it's a longer term issue? We have FMLA, right? Employee assistance programs. But I think just kind of talking about that. We all know what we do with physical health problems, right? You need a surgery. Okay, this is what we do. How about if you have a panic disorder that was recently diagnosed? What do you do? How do you approach your employer about that? So I encourage you all to think about that and think about how to incorporate that or begin the steps of what that looks like within your organization. And I think that's it. Any questions? Usually my audiences are military members or leaders in the military. So then I say, no one's leaving this room until I have at least 2 questions. But I don't get to hold that over you guys. Oh, look at that. Okay, there's all kinds of questions now. That worked so well.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for pointing out the buildup of prior drill weekend. I never thought about it. I thought, Friday they get in the car and they go and they come back on Sunday.
Right.
I never thought about the steps, and I think it's a great awareness as an employer, the steps to prepare for that and then what that looks like. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I should say that the consequences of not bringing everything with you or being ready for things can be great. So that's where the anxiety comes from, is I have to make sure I've checked and double-checked and triple-checked to make sure that I have my stuff squared away. So.
For those of you who remember the Yellow Ribbon Company conference at General Mills, we had a Starbucks employee talk about, just having his manager change a regular meeting the week before his drill weekend to Tuesday instead of trying to have it Friday morning, a mandatory meeting, made such a difference and made him feel really supported.
So just a quick thing, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of the 3M Military Support Network. I'm Tim McElroy, but I'm also a part of another resource that you might find helpful. I'm part of the Minnesota Military Family Foundation, and we offer grants, monetary grants for those soldiers or airmen who might be in financial dire straits, and they need some help. So they go to the Soldier and Family Readiness Centers, and they can actually apply for that grant there too. But it just helps, think about it, for some of these junior enlisted who have a mechanical breakdown in their vehicles or a heating element in their home. That's a devastating thing for many of them. So we're a resource as well, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about that as well.
Thank you. Yeah. 1-800-342-9647. They can also, if some soldiers don't want to come to behavioral health, but they can also come to us, right? And they can receive, get us to connect them with someone as well. So asking them to go to their unit readiness and say, hey, who's our behavioral health contact? And it's as easy as that.
You talked about some sort of pocket resource, right?
Yes.
Can you say more about that? I feel like
Yeah.
we should mass produce and like ship them to everybody. What's an example of what's in there? What are they talking
Sleep,
about? Right.
relationships, conflict, emotions. So we talk about just life stuff. Nothing that's like behind the curtain, just straight up wisdom. No, it's just like basic stuff. And then what happens is it's in a small group. So there might be like 4 of us or 5 of us, and there's questions at the end of each lesson, and then they ask each other the questions. And because it's such a small group, if they feel comfortable enough, they're willing to talk about their experiences, which prompts someone else to talk about their experiences, and another person, and another person. And pretty soon, not only do they feel heard, but they feel more connected. And we know that connectiveness is such a major part of healthy mental health.
You talked about the mental health days off, and I just wanted to provide a comment. I had a supervisor mention that sometimes it's uncomfortable to say, hey, I need a break. I'm having just an emotional day. And she said, just code word, just text me, call me and say, my pet died today. I won't ask you any questions, and you get one day off, and you don't have to explain anything, and you just get a day off. And so having kind of a code like that you set up in advance is kind of a neat opportunity so you can feel unafraid to do that.
Right. And I would say the goal is ultimately where our society doesn't need a code word, right? That our goal 10 years from now is that mental health is the same as a broken leg or diabetes, and that we view them the same and have equitable services for both. And while our health insurance is that, our dynamics in the society is not. Our values are about productivity and about individualism, right? And those two things go directly against mental health. So when we ask ourselves, why is our mental health increasing so much in this society? That's why. That is why. And that's not the only thing, but that is the basis of what we teach and push. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yes.
Tammy, we have an online question, and we're working towards all of our Minnesota colleges and universities, all 37 becoming yellow ribbon companies, and they've all been working on that, so we're excited. The comment that came on virtually is, would love to have a pocket resource available to pass out to the college community. can we partner to have some of your resources available to our Minnesota State colleges and universities?
Yeah, absolutely. That isn't owned by me, that is owned by the GAR, but can we share what we've done and bring best practice over to them? Absolutely. So you can give my contact information out to them. Okay, you guys achieved above and beyond the 2 questions. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that I've brought some information and some just like things to think about. You have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. Well, for everyone virtually, we are going to, and everyone here, we're going to invite everyone to go get some lunch. For those of you here, many choices with the cafe is open downstairs here at River Center, and we're going to meet back here at 2 o'clock for our afternoon session. For the morning session, people, if you want to save your seat, you can just put your bag on your seat because we will have many more attending this afternoon. Or just take your bag with you and come back on a different seat. But hopefully you can network during your lunchtime, and we'll report back here at 2 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.